Our look around the SEC continues with the Auburn Tigers, and Zac Blackerby is to tell us what is going on over on the Plains. Tell me, Zach, the transition from Gus Malzahn to Brian Harsin, where are we?
It's been a pretty big difference, and I don't think we realized how big of a difference it would be until Harsin comes in, and it's like, oh, the things that we've been doing or been seeing for the last 8 years, it's just a totally different setup now. I think culturally, Harsin is definitely a lot more strict. I think a lot of people, I think the easy comparison is Nick Saban is kind of what a lot of Auburn fans see, very business minded in his approach to the game of football. And Gus, I mean, a lot of the Gus critics said that he ran the program like a high school program. And now I think a lot of people kind of see why people said that, because Harsin's running like a business. When he came in, he hired members of his staff that had titles that didn't exist under the previous regime. So big difference. And then the biggest thing that I've seen the difference in culturally has been his approach to workouts. And it sounded like it was optional to like skip workouts under Gus Malzahn, which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
And you just heard kind of complaints from players or just comments from players, just how different it is in regards to getting ready for the season. So I think that's going to be a big deal, obviously.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see. And looking with this team, how is Mr. Milo's sweet tea performing himself, Bo Nix?
Well, I think with all that sweet tea, he should be pretty hyped up, you would think. Mm-hmm. No, Bo Nix is going to be the engine that takes this offense to where it could be. It could just be, what we've seen over the last 2 seasons with him, or it could go, up and away. It just kind of depends on how effective, how efficient he's going to be. And, there's been jokes amongst the Auburn fan base. He looks way more comfortable in this new offense. And, he could really excel and be something special. I think it's too early to tell. There's a big chunk of the Auburn contingency that said what they saw on A-Day with Bo Nix was enough for them to feel confident. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit. I didn't see a whole lot of, a different Bo Nix. I don't think we're going to know the answer to that until it's live and until, can he stay in the pocket and can he step into his throws? Every now and then, I mean, you see Bo Nix make these passes where he's just 40 yards on a rope throwing off his back foot. It's like, man, that guy has all the natural arm talent in the world. It's just, can he string it all together and be more consistent? And Harsin and Bobo have worked with good quarterbacks. They've developed quarterbacks. I think it's a great situation for Bo Nix. It just has to happen. But I think Auburn fans are excited to see a better version of Bo Nix this year. But we were also saying that this time a year ago.
Yeah. I don't know, for whatever reason, there's just an issue with Auburn fans when it comes to the quarterback position. You really can't take preseason and go off of it. You actually have to see it. Has anybody from the Auburn camp looked at the transition that Arkansas State went through from Gus Malzahn to Brian Harsin?
A little bit. It's just kind of tough because the Arkansas State situation, even Brian Harsin, going back to Boise and taking control of that program, I don't think any of it actually matters. I don't think any of that's relevant because at that time, I mean, Arkansas State was the top part of the Sun Belt and Boise State was the top part of the Mountain West. The difference here is it's like, okay, Harsin's done a good job keeping programs on top, but he acquired programs that are already on top. So Auburn is not on top in the SEC or the SEC West. And so I think it's going to be a totally different dynamic, but we have seen, whether it was his stops at Arkansas State, his stops at Boise, or even when he was an offensive coordinator at Texas, the quarterbacks that he acquired got better. Now, some of that I think has to do with just natural progression of getting older and spending more time playing college football. But there's a lot of guys that he really brought out some competitive play. You saw that more at Boise than anywhere else, but you saw it a little bit with Texas as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's comparable, if he's going to be able to kind of take that step when he's not at the top of a conference.
I understand that entirely. Real quick, let's move to the running back position. Tank Bigsby, great player. Everybody knows about him. But there's rumors coming off the plane that Jarquez Hunter might be the number two.
Possibly. I'm really high on Sean Shivers. I know he's not the tallest guy, but man, he's got world class speed and he'll run over you. And there's that iconic moment in the Iron Bowl a few years ago. But Jarquez Hunter is really, really taking the bull by the horns. He was on campus for like 5 minutes, and then Brian Harsin every Sunday tweets out his Ironman of the week. It's always one offensive player, one defensive player. And after Hunter was on campus for like 5 minutes, he earned that. So he's coming in and he is killing it based on all reports and all indicators. And I mean, you probably know Hunter well, him being a Mississippi guy. I mean, he can do it all, whether it's him dunking in cowboy boots or setting the state record for deadlift, whatever it is. I imagine he is an absolute freak in the weight room. So I'm sure that has a big bit to do with it, but it's interesting because that comes out. And then Devin Barrett, who was kind of presumed to be the number 3 running back in Auburn's running back room, he has entered the transfer portal. So could be coincidence. Yeah. Probably not, but it could be. I think Hunter's still the 3 guy because I've got all the faith in the world in Sean Shivers. I think Sean Shivers is going to be a clear number 2. But Hunter, there's a lot of positive buzz around him right now.
Yeah, and let's look at the problem area next, because this is going to determine whether Tank Bigsby and whoever is getting the ball in the backfield can succeed. What about the offensive line at Auburn? It's kind of a problem area. They've had trouble recruiting that position for somebody that ran the ball so much.
Right. And, the guys that he did get on campus, he got a lot of them to the NFL when you talk about the previous regime. I guess the positive angle of the offensive line for Auburn is they're all coming back. The negative angle is it's the same guys you had last year. There's no really big change there, but I think the scheme and the play calling over the last several seasons, but specifically last year, I don't think it helped out anybody. I don't think it helped out the offensive line. I don't think it helped out quarterback play, and I definitely don't think it helped out the wide receivers. So I think with Mike Bobo being the guy behind the offense and Brian Harsin having his presence known in the offensive game plan, I think calls are going to be more thought out and more scheme heavy to help out certain players in this scheme. I also think, a lot of Auburn fans knew what the play was going to be when they got to the line of scrimmage. I mean, that was a big thing that a lot of people pointed out in the Gus Malzahn era. So I think the scheme is going to help the offensive line out a ton, and I think the play calling is going to help out as well. But also, maybe something clicks. They've got a new offensive line coach. Will Friend came down from Tennessee. He and Mike Bobo have a history together. So I think that's going to be something that helps possibly gives them the next step. But look, I'm telling you right now, this offensive line, I'd be shocked if it was not the weakness of this team.
Yeah, and just talking to an Auburn guy, I have a question about this. Gus Malzahn, this is going back to the previous regime. Obviously, that offense performed best with a quarterback like Cam Newton or Nick Marshall under center. Why the insistence of creating a passing offense?
Yeah, I think the passing offense is who Gus was. I mean, you look back at when he really got his start at Tulsa. I mean, those guys threw the rock around a ton. And then you look at when he got on campus. Chris Todd was an absolute stud. I mean, he came in and wasn't very good. And then Malzahn shows up and Chris Todd at Auburn breaks all the passing records in a season. And then Cam Newton comes around and, they treated him like a running back. They just ran it. Then over the course of the season, he evolved as a passer. But then, you're right. When you look at it, every quarterback, with the exception of Nick Marshall, and Nick Marshall fell into his lap. I mean, this is a guy that essentially got kicked out of Georgia and then just showed up 2 weeks before the season started.
Yeah.
But every quarterback since then, Jeremy Johnson, while he was built and massive, very immobile. And then Sean White, Jarrett Stidham, and then, Bo Nix comes in. The only other exception is Joey Gatewood, and we all know how that turned out. He's now at Kentucky. I think Gus Malzahn wanted a quarterback that was known for being a passer. Why is that? I don't know. It wasn't until several years into it where, the fan base peer pressured him into going and get John Franklin III. And then, that Last Chance U documentary comes out, and it's like, oh, he wasn't even the starter at his junior college. What's going on with that? So I don't know. And, Auburn fans get frustrated when I say, like, hey, I don't think he wants a mobile quarterback. But when you look at the guys he went after, they weren't mobile quarterbacks. And I think that kind of makes the case.
Yeah, and I think the thing that actually did him in at Auburn was the fact that he didn't understand what he was.
Yeah. I mean, everybody close to Gus talked about how stubborn he was. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe that was kind of a symptom of that. But yeah, he wanted to be a guy that had a quarterback that passed it. Now, he'd want to set it up by the run, but it was either gadget jet sweeps or, or just, inside zone over and over and over again. And that's just kind of, and it worked earlier in his career at Auburn. And then, the rest of the conference kind of caught up with him. But yeah, I don't know what that is. And it's going to be really interesting to see what he does at UCF. Which version of his offense is UCF going to kind of pick up on? I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Because Dylan Gabriel is just a statue down there anyway. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think Gus is going to do well at the G5.
Me too.
But I think there's going to be some hiccups as well.
Yeah.
Let's go over to the defensive side of the ball. I know you have to get out of here in a couple of minutes. I know this is where the bacon was made for Auburn the last couple of years.
Right.
With the coaching change, how does the defensive side of the ball look right now?
So Derek Mason, obviously, was the head coach of Vanderbilt, came over, one of probably Brian Harson's biggest hire of his first coaching staff. And as soon as it came down, it's like, oh, Auburn's going to run the 3-4, which they've been running this 4-2-5 under Kevin Steele for a long time, and they've been really, really good at it. And I think the reason they've been really, really good at it is because they get good defensive backs and linebackers in, and they just line up and say, hey, you know what we're going to do. We're just going to be better at it than you. And Auburn's been able to put corners into the league and, consistently. And they've still got those types of corners. I think Auburn's got one of the best cornerbacks rooms in college football, led by Roger McCreary. He's going to be able to, essentially shut down one receiver for you in your game plan. So now we shift over to a guy that has constantly had to out-scheme to not lose by 50. He had to out-scheme the other team. And so I think Derek Mason is used to, whether it was at Stanford or if it was at Vanderbilt, he has been able to craft up really creative game plans and use his scheme to his advantage just to be competitive in the SEC. I'm curious to see what type of Derek Mason we see. Does he kind of line up and say, hey, we can beat you now because he finally has a talent somewhere to do that? Or is he going to still mix in a lot of scheme to confuse opposing offenses? But as far as like the front seven goes, I think you're going to see a lot of 2 down linemen and then 2 edge stand-up defensive ends. I think that's kind of what the assumption is going to be. You're going to see some 3-man front. You're going to see some 4-man front. And he said you're even going to see some 5-man front. And then Auburn has a really, really good linebackers room. Zacoby McClain led the SEC in tackles last year. Owen Papo, they call him the freak just because he's so athletic. He's probably a safety at the next level, but he's a linebacker at Auburn, could do a bunch of different things. I think you can leave him on the field if you go nickel. And then they get Chandler Wooten back, who opted out last year due to COVID reasons, but he comes back, and he's a really, really good number 3 linebacker in this room. So they've got a lot of different guys that can kind of rush the passer from the edge. They brought in some bigger bodies, some veteran guys. Tony Fair, the grad transfer from UAB, big defensive tackle that I'm really high on. It's going to be interesting to see how they use all of these different pieces, but Derek Mason's got a lot of guys to pick from in this front seven, specifically on that defensive line.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I wonder how is Auburn and Derek Mason specifically adapting to the fact that college football is changing to go in between the hashes. The number 1 receiver is now an inside guy, and the outside guys serve a different role.
Yeah, and I think you've seen Auburn kind of adapt to that. A lot of teams will put like a third corner in as that nickel back. And in the past, Auburn has essentially just used the nickel position for a third safety. Now you've seen them move guys around to where they can do different things. With the exception of Roger McCreary, everybody on this defense has played in the middle of the field or that opposite corner position. So whether it's a guy like Jalen Simpson is a guy that could be interesting, and then Nehemiah Pritchett was an outside corner for several games last year. They've moved him inside, and I kind of wonder if that's why, or if it's just the guy that they thought would be the best in replacing Christian Tutt, who left a lot of guys open last year. But I mean, even guys like Ladarius Tennyson, he was the backup nickel a year ago. When Tutt went down a few times throughout the year, they moved him to safety primarily in the spring. I wouldn't be shocked if we see him scoot back out to nickel. But also, Drayshawn Miller is a guy that they went after in the early in the transfer portal process. And, I mean, he was one of the best when you look at analytics like Pro Football Focus and things like that. He was one of the best corners in coverage in all of college football last year, coming from West Virginia. So they've got the talent to adapt to the inside of the field. But as far as what Derek Mason is going to do, I think they're just going to run a nice coverage of zone and man, which is something that we have not seen lately. I mean, you saw Kevin Steele try to run it and Auburn try to run it over the last several years, but whenever they went into zone, communication kind of fell apart and guys would typically get open. And that's tough to do. So that's kind of why you saw so much of it is like, hey, we're going to press you on the outside and we're just going to cover you. I think you're going to see more scheme involved. So I think that's how Derek Mason is going to kind of adapt to that.
All right. Yeah, and just looking at it, anything with your show you want to pimp?
I'm sorry?
Anything you want to promote?
Oh, yeah, sure. You got it. Yeah. If you want your Auburn coverage, Locked on Auburn is available wherever you get your podcast. Every morning we drop a new show at 3:00, man.
Okay. And every day we do the Palmcast at 10. Thank you very much, Zach, for coming by. And hopefully as the game gets closer, we can do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
All right. Zac Blackerby, folks.